Well, we're skipping further into the story than we usually do today, but I want to read about Joseph because I think this is a major theme in the Christmas story. The fact that God chose such an ordinary human being to be the father of Jesus. We're going to start with the 18th verse of the first chapter of Matthew. Now, the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "The virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but he had no marital relations with her until she had borne a son, and he named him Jesus. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One year when I was in college, I had a number of different jobs through the years, never worked for the church. One year when I was in college, I worked in the oil fields surrounding Wichita Falls. I worked with two brothers by the name of Leroy and Curtis. Leroy and Curtis were extraordinary human beings. They were some of the smartest guys I know, probably no more than an 8th grade education, and yet I learned so much from them. I've talked about them through the years. I probably have told this story before. One day we were working in the oil fields. We were pulling a well, and we got about half of this pump, about half of these rods up out of the ground, and all of a sudden the well started flowing. It was an oil well, but it started flowing, which means gas was coming up. And that can be a dangerous situation. So Curtis was the boss. Curtis said, "Okay, let's put out our cigarettes," and we did. We kept working that well, and it kept flowing gas. And you've got machinery around there and wrenches that make sparks. And so finally, Curtis thought that the best form of wisdom here would be shut the thing down. So he said, "We're just going to shut down and let this well calm down." And so we shut it down. We were sitting on the back of the pickup truck, and I remember sitting there wondering what we would do if that well were to catch on fire. And I looked there in the pickup truck. We had a small fire extinguisher there. And I turned to Leroy. I said, "Leroy, what would we do if this well were to catch on fire? Would we grab this fire extinguisher and try to put it out real quickly?" And Leroy said, as only Leroy could, "No, Don, no, we wouldn't." He said, "Do you see those woods out there across this pasture?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you see the path running from this truck to those woods?" I said, "No." He said, "If this well caught on fire, you would." Even as a 19-year-old, I understood that I was hearing extraordinarily wise words from an extraordinarily wise human being. I had another experience similar to that with an old Cherokee cowboy working a set of old Brahma cows in Madill, Oklahoma. I won't tell the story, but it was similar. I just learned from these remarkable human beings that sometimes retreat is the best option, and all sorts of wonderful things. I was the luckiest of all people growing up. My brothers and I grew up in a very middle-class family in the 1950s. And as many of you know, middle class in the 1950s isn't what we call middle class in Plano, Texas today. We didn't have very much money. But my mother and father, with great sacrifice, sent me to a wonderful, small, private liberal arts Methodist school, Georgetown, Southwestern University. A lot of you know about it, where I still serve on the board of trustees there. And there I received in the 1960s a semi-classical education. Very, very lucky. I read Plato and Aristotle, Euripides and Aeschylus. I still remember some of it. But as I look back over my life, I have to tell you that perhaps the most important part of my education was the education that came at the hands of people like Curtis and Leroy. People maybe with only 8th grade educations, oil field roughnecks and mechanics and welders and old cowboys who taught me some of the most important lessons of life, things that I will never forget, and who frankly knocked some of that nonsense out of my head that I learned from the PhDs in my undergraduate study or 4 years of graduate school. I think you understand why I'm sharing this with you today. When God got ready to choose someone who would be the father of Jesus, he went to this little tiny town in Nazareth and chose a 15, maybe 16-year-old boy by the name of Joseph. No more than an 8th grade education, destined to be a carpenter. Destined to be a carpenter. You see, it could have been Leroy or Curtis or a cowboy by the name of Roe or a welder by the name of Bill. It could have been Muleshoe, Texas, or Medill, Oklahoma, or Muskogee, Oklahoma. It happened to be a little rural town in the northern part of Israel, what is known as Galilee, called Nazareth. It happened to be a boy by the name of Joseph. But when God got ready to choose the father of Jesus, he went to this extraordinary, ordinary human being. You may not be aware of this, but it is a major theme in the Bible. I think it's one that most people do not know. And it is the tendency of God from the very beginning to choose the most unlikely people through which to work God's will. I mean, you would have thought that God would have chosen a PhD or a wealthy person or a mighty ruler to be the father of Jesus. But when you go back to Genesis, you find just the opposite, and it's a consistent theme over and over again. For instance, it starts right there with the story of Cain and Abel. You remember Cain and Abel, the children of Adam and Eve? Cain was the older of the two boys. And in the Hebrew culture, if you were the older one, you were the destined one. You were the one who was going to inherit the fortune. You were the one that was going to be the patriarch of the family. You were the one that was going to be the great leader. So Cain and Abel are out there. One's a rancher, the other's a farmer, and they make their offerings to God. Guess what? God rejects the offering of the older son and accepts the offering of the younger son. You know the rest of the story. Then you turn the pages a little bit and you come to the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau, the firstborn. Esau, the big, red-headed man's man, the hunter, the warrior, the fighter, the one who should have been the patriarch of the family, the one who should have been blessed and received the inheritance. Guess what? It was the younger son, Esau, the more effeminate one, the liar, the cheat. That was the one that God chose to be the one through whom he would work divine destiny. You see it over and over again. Jacob's sons, you see all of Jacob's sons there. The youngest was Benjamin. The next to youngest was Joseph. And the older brothers, you remember the story of Joseph, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. The other older brothers, jealous of Joseph, sell him into slavery into Egypt. And the day comes when all of the brothers will bow down to this young brother, Joseph. The story of David, which we talk about so often. I'm going to be preaching a sermon series in January about dealing with life's great battles, and we're going to talk about David quite a bit there. But here we see the story of David. God sends Samuel to go and choose the person who will become the king of Israel. And he goes to Jesse because God says Jesse will be one of the sons of Jesse, and he lines up all these sons of Jesse, tall, handsome, good-looking boys, and he goes down one after the other, and God says, not this one, not this one, not this one. And Samuel says, Jesse, surely you have some more sons someplace. He says, oh yeah, the youngest one, David's out there in the pasture, but it wouldn't be him. Samuel says, bring him in. And young David comes in, and God says to Samuel, this is the one. This is the one. God constantly choosing the youngest, the lowest, the least, through which to work the divine drama of life. And so we turn the pages and we get to Matthew and the story of Christmas. And God goes to this little town of Nazareth. I don't think it's what Isaiah had in mind when he said, wonderful, mighty counselor, mighty God, ruler of the earth. But he goes to this young man, Joseph, and says, you will be the father of God. You will call him Jesus, Emmanuel, which means God with us now and forever. And so this is a theme, I think. We talk about Christmas, faith, hope, love, joy, peace, all of these themes. But one of the themes of Christmas, I think, and of the Advent season is this understanding about humility. It really is a story about humility. It is about how God turns upside down our understandings of the way things work in the world. It's a new understanding about wisdom. And it's an understanding about how God works miracles through such extraordinarily ordinary human beings. And so we're really skipping ahead in the message a little bit. Ordinarily, we don't talk about this until Christmas Eve. But I just want us to take a moment and look at that scene in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve. Look at who was invited to the party. I mean, this is the birth of the Son of God, and you would have think that the high and mighty were invited to the party. Not so. You know the story. Jesus and Mary, they go to Bethlehem. Mary rides a donkey. They're turned away at the inn. They find themselves out in the stable with the animals and the manure. It's not what Mary had in mind. They weren't in the nice little birthing room at the hospital there in Bethlehem. And guess who gets invited? The donkeys and the horses and the cows and the shepherds. The divine invitation comes. Can you believe this? The divine invitation comes to the shepherds. They're out in the fields around Bethlehem. The invitation doesn't go to kings and queens. It doesn't go to the PhDs. It goes to the shepherds, the people who were the minimum wage workers of the time. And the shepherds say, let us go and see what's happening in Bethlehem. And we see them there, kneeling at the feet of Jesus. Now, before you remind me, I know about the wise men. And they were the exception. The wise men were the elitists of this scene. They came a little bit later, but the wise men were highly educated, they were wealthy, they were powerful. Everybody else came to Bethlehem either walking, the shepherds walked, or Mary came in the lowest form of transportation of the time, riding on a donkey. The wise men flew in on Southwest Airlines, where bags fly free. They needed that because their bags were full of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Okay, I'm just kidding. Southwest Airlines didn't exist at that time. It came a little bit later. But they came in on the Southwest Airlines of that time. They came in on camels. That was the transportation of the wealthy at that time. And they needed the camels because of the bags filled with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But when they got there, they fell to their knees on the ground and worshiped this baby. In front of this father who had an 8th grade education, this mother who maybe had a 6th or 7th grade education. They fell to their knees and worshiped. It is a story about humility and about true wisdom and about how God works God's divine drama through such ordinary human beings. One of the things that I really like about the way we're celebrating Advent this year in this church is this wonderful art exhibit. If you have not done so, I hope you will take a moment today and go through the atrium hallway and down into maybe Trinity Hall after the impact service is over and look at these wonderful pictures. Let me tell you the story behind these pictures. A woman who is a part of the art department at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, attends a church called the Church Under the Bridge. It is an outdoor church in Waco, and most of the people who attend this church are homeless and transitional people. And it started off because Susan Mullally wanted to create a church directory. We used to have church directories around here when we were smaller. We don't have them anymore. Maybe we ought to consider doing that again. I don't know. But she wanted a picture of all the members of her church. And so she started thinking about this. And the more she thought about it, she thought she wanted to do something a little bit special with this. And so because of an extraordinary experience, you'll probably hear about this from Alexandra, her own personal experience, she decided to ask each of the church members to pose for their photograph with the one thing that they keep. These are people who don't have very much. Some of them only have this one thing. But if there was just one thing that they would keep, what would it be? And so these photographs are fascinating. I like there's one down here, there's a picture of a guy who's got his golf clubs. And I like that because it makes me think about a lot of you. I know some of the men, that's the one thing you would keep, would be your golf clubs. But they're wonderful pictures. You go through there and you see all of these pictures of the things that they would keep. When this exhibit debuted in Waco, a critic for one of the newspapers in Waco wrote this about it. Who would ever want to go and attend this art exhibit? It's just a bunch of pictures of losers. And of course, on the one hand, that's a perfectly accurate statement, isn't it? Just a bunch of pictures of losers. People like you and me, wholly dependent upon the grace of God for a meaningful and purposeful and loving and peaceful life. I like having these pictures around here this year because, to me, they have turned our entire church into a manger scene. You see, as I have passed these pictures this year, I like to look at them and think, yeah, these are the shepherds. These are the shepherds who have joined us this year. We are part of a wonderful program called Family Promise, which is a program that serves homeless people here in the city of Plano. And some of those homeless families are going to be our guests in the Christian Life Center over Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Hotel Katrina will rise to serve again those who need shelter in a time of need. So I like having these pictures and these people around that remind me that these are like the shepherds who have come to worship in wisdom, in extraordinary wisdom, this baby that we call Jesus. It is a reminder to me of the fact that Jesus chooses the most ordinary, the least and the lowest, to play out God's divine drama. It is a reminder that we are wholly dependent upon the grace of God, every one of us. It is a reminder that Jesus chooses us to do small things with great love. And in so doing, we change the world forever.